12:30? No.
Yeah.
We're done at 1:45 here. My next panel isn't done until 1:45. So I said I was going to go over to where Christina was at 2. But we're supposed to.
Don't worry, we'll talk about it later. I'll figure it
Yeah.
out.
Okay.
When I asked them,
So I'm going to invite us all to shift over this way, and you can either come close or be far away. We're going to, however you feel comfortable. We wanted to leave some open space for an activity we're going to do a little bit later, but this feels very far away. So, hi, my name is Suzanne Pullen. I'm from Arizona State University, and
my name is Tara Hack, and I'm also from Arizona State University.
I'm Matt Nolan. I'm also from there.
okay.
I'm Anastasia Prentice. I'm from Holy Names University in Oakland, California.
And I'm Sarah Parslow. I am from San Diego State University, also in California.
So
We're all Westerners, right?
we wanted to perform our, well, not really perform, but we sort of engage the conversation that actually brought us to having this panel, why we're doing it, and what some of the complications about even having this conversation might do for us. And then we'll do an activity where we can all sort of engage a process for what our body, our spiritual self may feel like, both in our private, communal, and public spaces, and also in the classroom. And then have a conversation after we do that. Does that sound okay to everybody? And there's drawing and plans there, and we'll do that in a minute.
So we're
Hi.
in?
Well, so Tara and I were talking, and
So this is that conversation.
right.
Oh, right.
Suzanne,
Yeah.
could you introduce me to the people on the panel? that I
Oh,
don't know?
I'm sorry. I don't know her either. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Suzanne. Nice to meet you. This is Anastasia Prentice. This is Matt.
Hi, Matt. Nice to meet you.
This is Tara.
That's Suzanne.
And, well, so we share an office. And we talk a lot, share a lot of personal details, some of which are sort of awkward, culturally perhaps taboo for some people. So yes, right.
I'm that one.
Yeah. So when I started talking about my son's gay dads in a conversation, it wasn't until I found out that
Spiritually speaking, I'm a Christian.
and so then that made me worry about how safe it was to have those conversations and how safe that office space was for me and all the judgments that I had around what being a Christian might mean.
Because let's face it, Christians don't really condone that type of behavior.
Some
We're not really open to that.
Not all.
Well,
It's
and that's-
complicated.
It's complicated.
Right, so which one are you? Was the question that came up. And then talking about the kinds of things that we teach in critical communication classrooms and how some of those kinds of critical dialogues come in conflict with perhaps certain
Beliefs.
Spiritual identities.
Right. So that's why we decided that if we were having this kind of a complex kind of interaction without even saying what it was that we were thinking, that maybe this was a conversation we wanted to have in a larger setting, because I bet our students are having the same kinds of questions when they enter into our classrooms, wondering where we sit or stand in relationship to their own spiritual practice or identity or theology.
And that was really where the heart of this conversation takes place. And of course, I used my quotation marks earlier because spirituality is complicated. And so, as someone who identifies as Christian but doesn't at all have any sort of problem having it, or issue even having that type of conversation with a colleague, I wanted to feel safe enough to come out, so to speak, as a spiritual person, and yet not feel stigmatized or stereotyped by somebody that I share an office with every single day. And also free in that space where we share an office to talk about how our theologies, if at all, inform our pedagogy, our scholarship, our research. So for example, when I talk about my research, I often say that I feel called to it. When I think about my students, I often think about them through prayer. How are those types of things allowed or prohibited or restricted or limited or even made space for within academia? And I think that we were finding that between ourselves we had a lot of misconceptions, just understanding each other's spiritual identities and what that meant for us to share an office, which by the way we're very good friends and so it didn't mean a lot. But I mean really, but
For
it,
you.
and then at the same time, it does.
Right.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of us still are not sure that we are going to come out on this panel about our own spiritual, theological, or religious. And so we wanted to talk about that in front of you, to have this kind of conversation, to practice awkwardness and discomfort that you might be experiencing and see what we feel comfortable doing. I mean, we've all outed ourselves in our collegial and academic affiliations. Yes.
Yes, we have.
So, are you, you teach,
Oh, at a private Catholic institution.
uh-huh.
Would
So are you,
you like to know?
you're not gonna,
I don't know.
she's my best friend, so I kind of already know. This is also the reason why she's on this panel, is because we wonder how safe are our bodies and our spirit in the places that we teach.
No, I feel very safe where I teach. I sit on the Catholic Identity Committee.
And do you feel the same with your colleagues?
Yes, I do. In fact, I got a letter, an email just last night from a man who has a theology degree from Graduate Theological Union on the East Coast, not the West Coast one, saying, would you like to participate in our prayer service at 12:30 on Tuesday? I'm not sure exactly what your affiliation is, but I'm sure you'll have really something great to add. And I said, well, yes, of course, I'd love to do that. But I didn't answer his question. You're very we would get along well in the classroom.
Yeah, and part of the organic, I think, nature too that you guys are just experiencing in our own conversations that have so much to do with our own comfort levels. Whether or not our institutions support that, whether they don't. Coming from Arizona State University and speaking only for myself, there are a lot of critical scholars, and I wonder, I was just asked to teach gender in the spring, and I wonder if I would have been assigned to teach a critical gender course, if someone in the department may have thought that my Christian theology would impact the way that I teach that course. So what does that conversation look like in office spaces, between mates, between students in front of your classroom?
Oh, when they want to do a speech like against abortion, right? Or again for a prayer in schools.
Yeah.
So how do I, as a professor, create a space that allows for critical rational debate that may not always be, perhaps from my perspective, grounded in critical rational facts or, perspective? How do I create a space for that conversation to happen where people in the class feel safe engaging or believing or practicing how they do? And I'm not sure I have an easy answer to that. I've had colleagues who will ban topics from the classroom because they're too controversial. Well, then if we in a communication class ban subject matter because we're afraid of the discourse that it might engender, then how are we teaching our students to engage in those kinds of conversations outside the classroom with friends or family members or coworkers, or not at all, or with their political representatives, right? So how do we, if we avoid the
social constructions have come to make them who they are. When I read a paper that has a faith component, my heart gets excited because I am connecting with that student in their writing because we share that space of spirituality. Where I've also seen colleagues, for example, using Facebook to say, some student tried to preach to me about Jesus in their paper today. And I wonder how these proclamations from our students or these spaces where our role as educators is to engage them in critical thinking, in problem solving, in student development and identity development in ways that prep them for the bigger world. How do those types of spaces also affect our grading? Just knowing our own ideologies and our own theologies that we bring to the table. And so we wanted this also to be a participative space, of course within your own bounds and comfort zones, but where we name this particular thing, we identify it, we talk about it, we problematize it, we critique it, and then we really try to create an open space where we can understand how these things work together in the classroom.
Does that sound like,
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
maybe can we give them a second to, like, is there something that we want to put, so we told you what our idea is. I can imagine you all wondering what might be happening here. So are there things that come up for you in just hearing that we want to maybe put into the mix? Things, issues, concerns, questions you guys have?
So just a little confusion about, so you all wrote papers in which you addressed scholarly conversations?
No. This was, what we wanted to do was sort of an embodied activity exercise for us to have a conversation around these issues. I think there's we were talking about how there's not a lot of scholarship about this problem, this challenge. And part of we wanted to not be in our heads either. So that's why we're taking you into this other activity so that we can be in more of an embodied space so that we don't spend all of our time up in here. Because when we're in spirit and we're in communion with whatever that means for us, it's not necessarily from here. It's from this, maybe another place. Also acknowledging too that not everybody has any spiritual affiliation. And what does that also mean in the classroom? Yes.
I think it seems like also addressing the role of the educator. Like, what is the role? Is it to indoctrinate? Is it to set right? Or is it to, like you said, create a space where students are free to explore themselves, to engage this dialogue, right?
And I think it's interesting to look at issues of power and the idea of coming out, but then who can come out in a safer way. So, for instance, I am a master's student at San Diego State, and I was working with one of my mentors there, a professor, and he started to describe his research as a calling. He was being called to it. He felt like this was something that God had led him to, and for me, that was a moment where I said, wow, that's inspiring that someone can openly say that and feel comfortable saying that. And at the same time, as a student, even though I ascribe to, I am spiritual, I'm a Roman Catholic, I still didn't say that or say, that I feel called to do certain things. And so my comfort level wasn't quite where his was. And so where is that power dynamic? He's a full professor, I'm a master's student. And even though he feels safe, does it mean our students feel safe?
And even I'm going to name my resistance, right? Because I hear the word indoctrination come from you, and part of me comes from my affiliation is usually a marginalized and oppressed. It could be, yes, but it's so I experience resistance to what I feel sometimes is an attempt to correct me, or
As an educator?
as a person in a spiritual body, or that's not part of a dominant cultural tradition that wants to say you can have the freedom to believe and feel how you, but don't tell me or try and change me to feel a different way or practice a different way. So I heard the word indoctrination, right? So I'm just wanting to come on to that about how much even talking about our own spiritual traditions, for some people, can feel like you're trying to convert me. And if I stand too close to you, you're going to pollute me with your ideas and your ways, and that's going to, yeah. So, right.
And the opposite way, right?
Exactly.
So
So,
that was part of how our friendship got out. I mean, we experienced this tension early on, and luckily, I mean, being communication people, we just came out with it, which, by the way, I would call speaking in the light. It was, you know, it was a very different type of thing than what Suzanne was experiencing. But we had said, you know, can you talk to me about your son, you know, who has gay parents? Can you talk to me about your spiritual beliefs? Can we do those things as a Christian? After I say I'm a Christian, do I get to say the word shit or fuck after this? You know, in the office when I'm talking about things, because now I've set up my life in this way. So what does that do to our friendship, to accountability, to our lesson planning as we help each other through those times in the classroom, those types of things?
and our positionality and our standpoint, either from our own perspective or the way we get labeled or named. And notice I have 2 people have outed themselves on the panel, and the other 3 are shadowed in darkness. And I'm not, and, you know, that's, yeah.
Really quiet.
Well, because they talk all the
I
time.
know.
How do you feel like it is working with both of
I
them?
hedge myself a little bit, so she always kind of sets me up.
I just have to cut her off when she talks.
You do?
So, yeah, I know.
Do you ever cut me off?
Yeah, she does.
Well, if I ever want to say something,
Okay.
I have to be like, "Ah, say that, that, that."
But I react into the darkness part because
Oh.
I think that there's an impermanence in moving, and I have a doctorate in women's spirituality, so to be fair, this is not unfamiliar ground for me. I spend a lot of time figuring out how to move in and out of spaces of spirit. And the disclosing part it is very tricky, but it's also to withhold just enough to see our humanness in the classroom is really valuable for me, at least. And so I generally take language out. I've read way too many books from too many traditions to say this is where I sit,
Yeah.
and this is how I see. Because I'm able to find myself in the other person, and I can often language my experience with their language, and it doesn't feel foreign or affrontive or pushing to me. It just feels like, oh yeah, this is this path we're figuring out together.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to, we have created now this dichotomy on the panel as dark and light. We don't know, we know, but even though I have said, now I've outed myself, I'm Roman Catholic, but what does that mean to me can be very different. And
I was baptized Catholic.
yes, and that's the rub, because I can say that I'm Roman Catholic, I can say that my family is that way, I can say that I go to a Catholic church, I can say that I was baptized that way, but I can also say that I am still exploring, even though I can claim that identity. It does not define me, it does not encompass all of my beliefs, and there may be points where I'm talking with someone and I can see their viewpoint, and I can see other points. So by outing myself, you might assume certain things about me that don't hold true. And so that can be a really difficult thing, especially as I'm in a faith journey. I don't see my identity as a one-time shot outing. I wanted to make the same thing. Thank you.
Well, I have so many stories I could tell, but I'm not going to tell them until you say, let's tell stories.
Okay.
But I do notice within myself that I was trying to do some self-reflective work about the different voices within me. And I realized even within me, I code shift, to write from my personal sort of spiritual voice and that language, and then shift into the academic.
Right.
So I'm interested kind of how you do code shifts, and I'm also interested in just not only the outing is that sort of entrance to the topic. But also this, what you find are things that open the space,
Right.
that make it comfortable enough. And also, once you begin disclosing, what does that open up?
Right. Yeah, thank you. Yes?
I was thought about geography and how that plays into this, because I teach at the University of Toronto, which the UN named the most multicultural city in the world. So that kind of difference is expected.
Right.
I think about the diversity of my students, and that diversity is not even anything that is surprising, I think,
Right.
to myself or my students. So I think the geographical
So
climate.
I came from San Francisco State University to Arizona State University. And the biggest fear I had was the culture shift and culture shock I would experience. Coming to an institution that has, there are very devout students on that campus.
Sure.
And there are some very specific affiliations that funding of the university have that I didn't experience at San Francisco State. And so I had a lot of preconceptions about what that might mean and my safety in the university. That's laughing. Like somebody's going to come by and like kidnap you or axe murder you or
Because
something.
this was your feeling as you
Yes.
came into Arizona. You're like,
Yes.
people are gonna do something to me. They're not gonna accept me. And
People have done
Yeah.
people
And they
have
probably
done
have.
things to people of my people. My people have had things done to them. So of course there's a little bit of fear. Okay, so anybody else want to add anything before we do our activity?
Well, I just wanted to speak to that geography. The interesting thing, the culture wars within an institution and where you're placed. So I'm in San Diego State, and California is very liberal in general, but San Diego is a military town, and so you tend to have, just because of that, much more conservative people, and so they tend to ascribe to more conservative religious points of view. And so on campus and within the student body, there's a definite kind of culture war going on where you have very liberal and very conservative all going on at the same time.
I kind of want to piggyback off you. I'm from San Diego. I grew up in Oceanside, so I might be familiar with that area. And I went to community college there, Maricosta. You might be familiar with that. So that area is very, very conservative, at least in my experience of it. And then when I transferred to Cal State Northridge, which some of my colleagues are here, that it was definitely different. Just going from San Diego to Los Angeles, that was a culture shift for me.
different.
You drive differently there.
2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. You can drive differently there. Do I need to relearn how to drive? There's so many different things. It's I don't know if any of you relate to that, but just the different shifts that occur, and even in terms of like theology, just seeing, I think, exposing myself to different perspectives. I think that was something that was very interesting and changed my perspective of the classroom itself. So.
Yeah. And did you have a comment?
Yeah, something that's coming up as you guys are speaking about this that I'm sort of thinking about is I think that there's sort of the overarching cloud above all of this is tolerance that we all have, that we're in communication studies, we're tolerant, we understand everybody's point of view.
Right.
And as a professor of public speaking, I think that shifts for me a little bit when you're giving a platform for somebody to speak to the whole classroom. If I get a paper that I think is a little marginalizing and the language they use is maybe discriminatory to a group or something, I can look at that paper and give feedback to that, and I'm the one who sees that.
Right.
If I give the stage to someone who's going to give a speech that says some people in my room shouldn't have rights,
Right.
that I believe are like fundamental rights, that is like a real struggle for me, because I'm definitely one of the instructors who does not ban any topic, because I think you're not doing a service to your students by not teaching them. You have to cite credible research and deconstruct it no matter what you believe. And I've seen students with dramatically different opinions than I have do that well. And I sort of give that disclaimer throughout the semester. I tell my students that I watch speeches that I think are personally horrific. I can't believe someone feels that way in the world, and you have an A. You did a good job. And I can do that.
Yeah.
But it's really a struggle for me to approve a thesis statement that I think will directly tell some students in my class that they're not enough.
Thank you. Thanks for
Well, I'll finally speak again since I've been so quiet.
I'm very worried about it.
Well, I mean, this is right. So we talk about sort of a way of coping with and trying to feel out space, right? And saying, is it okay to say something? And so that, Tara and I, when we started our program, it was like both of us on like, okay, what do we say here to people? Like, we don't want to get sort of, you come out, you say something, and then you suddenly get marginalized, and you're like, and you get all these associations, all this baggage of people that have marginalized other people, then just like thrown on you, and you're like, I didn't want that. Like, don't give that to me. And so for Tara and I, it was like there was like these weird things where you're like, okay, wait, you use that language, I know that language, and you're like, wait a second, let's have this serious conversation over on the side here, so no one else knows that we're having this. And so yeah, I tend to not with students, with colleagues, other than these two, of saying, yeah, like, I'm a Christian, because then you get all those associations that come with that. And frankly, I mean, what I've found is that even with students, with colleagues, then it just stops conversation. Because they're like, oh, well, you must mean this. You're like, well, look, even if I do think that doesn't mean I don't want to talk to you and treat you like a person, and why can't you treat me like a person? And why can't we have that conversation and have that serious conversation and have dignity with each other? And so I choose usually not to say anything and purposely alter language in a classroom or with other people that would sort of mask that, because there is just this huge association in our country with those kinds of things. So.
And now I feel like, okay, that's 3 people on the panel who have come out, and I feel like I have to speak out into this space. I grew up in a half-Catholic, half-Jewish household. I grew up going to Seder and going to Midnight Mass, and I am a practicing pagan and have been a pagan for the last 25 years since I met her. But you weren't, I didn't, okay.
She didn't really out me though, don't worry.
Okay, so anyway, I want to name that in this space because I also want to hold that there are a lot of religions, spiritual traditions that are not represented on this very sort of monochromatic panel, and I want to name that. We wanted to engage our thinking in a broader spectrum, and I want to name that my affiliation so that if there are other people in the audience who feel not represented, I'm not going to represent you, but know where the intention comes from, and that I know that outing myself as a pagan is not a safe thing to do in certain locations. Because of those same kind of what the baggage that comes along with, well, coming out to my mother as a pagan, like, she was raised Catholic, that's the bad word, that's like the Satan word, and what all those connotations come up with. So, yes.
If you could just explain what is a practicing pagan, because I did not have no idea.
So when I use the word pagan, I don't like to associate myself as a Wiccan, because that has a very specific connotation. The pagan could represent anyone who has a polytheistic practice or tradition, an earth-based tradition, where you don't look to a particular divinity or divine source, that you are more earth-based, what I see and feel in the energy surrounding me, and perhaps Buddhist traditions, Hindu, I'm trying to think of some other Wiccan traditions are considered pagan traditions. Native American traditions, spirituality, are pagan traditions. But one thing I think that probably connects most pagan traditions is not believing in a particular monotheistic divinity as the source of salvation. I think many pagans believe in a more communal responsibility, that we are responsible to and for our actions here and now. But that defining pagan is a very hard thing to do. But that's my best shot at it.
Sometimes people who are within a particular religion would define anyone outside of theirs as pagan or heathen. So it depends on where you're standing, what that definition would mean, because it's language.
Yeah.
When you were saying something about the construction of sort of the panel, I did think this was interesting that this is sort
You're
of
the only guy on it?
well that right because well, I mean just frankly like right the guys just aren't associated with that sort of thing or we just don't talk about it. But that we have sort of this notice this sort of dynamic of the panel, right? There's not all these other faiths represented, there's a belief systems represented, and that just seems very indicative of where the conversation is in the academy, right? It's just not out there. Because for me to then identify people in my own department and other departments, it's almost impossible because no one talks about it. It's just sort of like this underlying thing that we're like, well, it totally affects everything in my life and how I look at everything, but I don't talk about it with everyone because then you get all these associations, right? And so when I'm in my research lab, other people they sort of bash Christianity, and I just whatever. Like there's so much baggage. I just let them talk, and I just don't say anything about it. I'm like, yeah, that is unfortunate, right? Those people are jerks, and so then it's kind of this thing where you just don't talk about it because there's so much baggage, so much experience that we've all had with other faiths within our own faith. But like, yeah, I don't want to associate with those people. I don't want to associate with those people. That really, I think it has like eroded any sort of common ground that we've been able to discuss anything.
So what we want to try and do is invite us all to create visually what some of the communities that we are a part of might be. So first, if we're all okay with it, could you lead the brief? And can we do a time check? So what does that mean? When is our thing over?
I don't know what time
Okay.
it is. I think 12:30.
So,
right?
yeah.
Or 12:15.
So do you want to lead the brief, the thing in the beginning?
Did you have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's just, the idea of tolerance, we could talk about the entire conference, right, and our entire discipline.
Right.
And it's an interesting discussion here and an interesting panel because we have an idea, and I think that's what you were just speaking to, this idea that we're tolerant and that we accept everyone, and, to use a liberal term, we're all inclusive, right? But there's this very real split, whether it be critical or secular and religious affiliation, right? That it is silencing. We don't talk about it, or maybe whatever the climate is of the institution dominates whatever discussion is allowed to take place. I think it's very cool that we're having this conversation. And the other word that came up was naming and labeling. And, we're so often exploring that as the source of the conflict itself and our identification with the label.
Right.
So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah. And at the same time, that naming and labeling draws affiliations and draws allegiances. So it's possible that by my outing myself as a pagan, someone else in this room feels safer going, okay, there's one of me in here, or there's one of, I'm not alone here. And there's a way that allyship functions in other identity matrices, right? So when you out yourself as gay, bisexual, transgender, you name that, you are creating a space for someone else to see you either as an ally or as someone other. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very challenging place to sit in, and at the same time can be a very, a self-reflective place that I don't think we spend much time.
I like though that you said that naming sometimes is the source of the conflict because one of the, and very briefly before we do our thing, one of the things that I noticed, for example, I don't know about your schools, but we have Safe Zone at our school. Safe Zone is through the LGBTQ community, and it is a series of seminars and trainings for educators and administrators to really sort of get briefed on the culture of LGBTQ students and how we can be there for our students that perhaps are at different stages of the coming out process or this identity development in their own student lives, and how the campus environment affects that type of development. And that's something that I was just Safe Zone certified and really highly involved in, and yet at the same time, it's that dichotomy by naming myself as a Christian, by naming myself an LGBTQ critical scholar in a community that I don't belong, By saying that I feel called to that research, does that then threaten that chain of command there? By saying, am I trying to indoctrinate? Am I trying to create this conflict? No. This is, for me, this is a place where my heart lies. What does that mean to say that? How does that show up in a paper that is accepted at an NCAA panel? What division do you put that paper in? Things like that. And those are really difficult conversations to have. Really, when we think about things like naming, when we think about things like power dynamics and where you are. I'm a second-year doctoral student. I should probably be in Preston right now. And then in 2 years I'm going to be on the job market, so I should probably use a language that would be helpful to that. So it's just, those are some interesting things to think about as well.
And the question of geography is also relevant because when she put the thing up, I was like, what's that? And she was a safe zone. I'm like, yeah, see, where I come from, the whole campus is perceived as like a safe zone, right? So we don't have to have this little, safe zone that does not monitor that it's okay for you to be here. There's that. And so how does that also create?
Right, and we're both growing in California, and in my institution, I would say that my office, while it doesn't have certification, is one of the places on campus where students are really that they can find shelter if they need it. And it's in Northern California Bay Area, which is, by some people's definition, the Mecca for people who are making those choices or decisions.
One last thought, did you have?
I'm just going to comment. I think all of these ideas have, are really blended in with identity and mediating, the things. Even like age, for example, as a young instructor, sometimes that can be something that seems like a roadblock. And some experiences you may have had in your life. And I think it's important that you brought up theology because, like you mentioned, it's not something that we talk about. It's like, oh, okay, well, you believe that, I believe this. I don't know what you believe, but I know you believe something else. And maybe that. But it's just one of those things that I think, and I think part of our identity that's not really discussed or maybe even communicated as much out in the discourse. So I thank you for bringing all of this up.
So I'm going to invite you to put your folders aside for a minute and maybe put your feet flat on the ground, sit comfortably.
Oh yeah, we thought that for just a couple minutes here so that we could kind of get, our bodies in the same places perhaps that our minds are thinking and our mouths are moving, that it might be...
Some more than others?
Yeah. That might have been out for 3 days now. So and he's like a brother that I didn't want. So. We thought that this would be a great time to invite you to participate in whatever spiritual and or non-spiritual practice that you would have to just take a moment of silence, whether that's prayer, meditation, stretching, grounding, breathing, and I don't want to be ignorant. I'm not familiar with all traditions. So whatever that space and time means for you, just to sort of be in your spiritual or non-spiritual self for a brief moment before we get into the activity today. So thanks. We'll just start giving them about a minute here. Thank you. And now Suzanne's going to lead us in the visual part.
So can I actually invite us to sit in the front row chairs together because it feels very... So
Which is the front row?
just if we could just turn these chairs around and create a circle. Anyone want to pass these out? And then if you, I'm going to move your... create a nice big So I'm going to invite you again, once you get
There's a little
comfortable,
exit.
to
How many are you supposed to do?
4.
Oh,
Yeah.
Sorry, I gave no directions there.
Good job.
So I'm going to invite us to perhaps close our eyes if we need another. I want you to imagine the place that you go when you are in spirit, when you are in contact, meditation, prayer, whatever that mode may or may not be for you. I want you to go to the place when you are alone and you are in connection alone, solitary, with that place that speaks spirit to you. The place where, for some people, it may be drawing or painting. For some people, it may be prayer. It may be meditation. It could be like dancing. Whatever. It could be laying out in a patch of nature. But whatever, when you feel it most in communion with your spirit and spiritual self, can you please draw that? Draw what that looks and feels like to you. There's markers and crayons that help yourself.
And you can use words.
Yes, you can. Yeah, you can have images or words. You can, if you don't feel like drawing, maybe write descriptive words of what that looks, feels, sounds like.
So words or description?
Yeah, words. I prefer the drawing. I'd like you to go to the drawing place, and if words want to come into the drawing, that's good too. Let's start maybe with the drawing place. Well, that's okay. You don't have to just start drawing, so it doesn't have to have that.
Try not to move to a place of crazy.
Yes, there's nothing, yeah, just... So no judgment on the quality or what it is you're writing, drawing. I'm terrible at drawing, so... Maybe just another minute or two. If you're finished, can I take your... So for the next one, can you imagine yourself, close your eyes, and now imagine yourself in a space in which you are in community with like-spirited others. So when you are in a place where you are either in worship, in meditation, in celebration, in a community with others who are like-spirited to you, can you please draw what that feels or looks like? Actually ask if you guys can smoosh in a little bit this way so I can use the space behind you. So, I'm going to just jump to the last skip, so we're just going to move through. So, for a minute, I want to invite you to close your eyes. We're not going to draw this part, but I want you to be in your body. What does it feel like when you move from the place of community that you share with other people, like-spirited others, and you move into a place where you are not sure, that you do not know what the spirited affiliations of those around you might be? Feel it in your body just for a minute. What shifts then? Imagine what that picture or that image might look like. How might you feel differently when you move from that place into a place of uncertainty and unknown, perhaps around others who are not supportive or acknowledging of your affiliation? Feel perhaps in our body where you feel that. Where do you feel the eyes or the gaze or the energy or the contraction? Now I want you to imagine yourself walking into the onto campus, into your office, into the departmental office, into your classroom. Please draw what it feels like for your spiritual self in the classroom. What does that look and feel like? And draw that. Those images in the center here in a circle. And if I can invite you also to pull your chairs back a little bit.
Where's picture number 3?
Picture number 3 is right here. So can I invite us all to come over here to this first one? What are some of the images that we might see here? What are some of the common, and we can walk around them if you need to sit closer, but
I see 2 suns.
There's a lot of land imagery.
open spaces.
Bodies.
Bodies, yeah.
Movements.
Bodies in motion. I see a trio here and a trio there.
A lot of fluid swirling things.
Some of the words here, journey, denial, witness, comfort, community, grounding, dancing. Can you read some of those?
Prayer, hope, love, spoken, move, joy, fear crossed out.
Calm, quiet, present, servant.
Journey, light, communion, acceptance, seeking, love. There's a lot of hearts.
They do have a center.
Yeah.
In some.
Right, yeah, the center point. Yeah. Ideas just to see what this might feel like. What did it feel like when you were drawing these places or these ideas?
I can share mine. And for me, my spirituality is always a part of me. So those shadings that I have on the outside, and then I replicate that on the inside, is that picture. That whatever's in me is also outside me. It's not me and different.
Right.
Always inside me. I take that with me wherever I go. Just just like you can't leave your body when you go somewhere. I take my spiritual self with me everywhere.
So maybe naming this idea that, you know, in research we try to have this, we say that you should be an objective scholar, researcher, and those people who practice more qualitative or ethnographic methods know it's not possible to leave the body and those investments outside the room. And what you've named in a way is the way that we don't leave our connections, our spirit outside the room, either as a researcher or as an educator, as a person, fellow colleague, classmate. Anybody else want to name or articulate anything?
I feel like on mine that there's a really deep.
Which one?
This
Spiral.
thing. Because the lineage of these conversations is long-standing, and the capacity to cross into unknown territory with others is as an ancestral call for me moving forward.
This is mine here, and it's supposed to be kind of the edge of the ocean on a beach. And that's just, you know, that's a particular place, North Beach. But just that openness, the expansiveness, the dynamism, the eternal kind of nature of it, just my whole, how when I'm there, my whole physical being, no matter how I bring it, is responsive to the place and kind of quiets and deepens and calms.
Yes.
And that it reminds me to draw it in this space unexpectedly. It made me realize I may be in touch with it, but I don't think of finding it here.
And how so much of the work we do in academia is really can be the antithesis of that, but not always, right? But coming to these conferences, you know, we listen to people presenting their papers, but we're here in body. The reason we come to the conference is to be in body with others, in a way to learn from each other's embodied presence. Sometimes, at least that's why I come, because that's why I don't just read the journal articles online. Right? I want to come here to meet with others. So in a way, we are connected in some community. So speaking of that, did you want to say something? Yes.
We're referring also when you said antithesis of in terms of thinking.
Right, because we're in our thinking mind, our rational thought mind, not our sensate experiential spirit place or animal mind or body. Yeah. Great. Wow. So anybody notice anything similar, different?
They're very angular here.
And also groupings, right?
There were structures.
A lot of places.
Chairs.
More chairs.
Yes. And there's not, yes. And there are bodies, but the bodies are not by themselves. The bodies are in relationship with another. And that's, makes sense if we're in community with like-spirited others. But in some of these places, even there's the place. Oh, here's one body by themselves in a space.
Well, it's not. I'm looking at it, but maybe that is me. I'm looking at what I did there.
That's interesting.
Well, you said that the reason that came out was because you talked about three different. You said walking into school, walking into the department office.
Oh no, that's the last one. That's over there. This is in communion with
Oh, right.
other like-spirited others. Was that what you meant to put over here? No, I think you did. No, that's yours.
No, that's mine. Happy
Yeah.
in the classroom.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the idea that sometimes community, where we find community is location, is geographic, is a place that brings us.
I think the structure and the angles in a lot of them is like we have our own kind
why didn't it come up over there? And I wonder what will come up in the next place. Is this indicative of shared norms and behaviors and cultural codes and values and things that we ascribe to this experience? Is it not? What are the voids? And those types of things are always very interesting to kind of think about visually.
Or how yours looks.
Well, I kind of wanted to point out mine that the person I find communion with is actually someone who's agnostic and I'm religious. He's my professor. I didn't put his name there in case it's someone. But it's funny that I don't find communion with people who think like me, like I'm Muslim. I didn't put my mosque there or the people there because I don't relate to them. But I relate more to this agnostic spiritual professor that I have. And that's not important because we're both spiritual. And I put his office there because that's where I feel like I can be myself.
Similarly, mine is the one with the word home, and you might think that that might be home as in, like heaven or feeling at home. And then when I wrote that word, I was thinking of an actual house growing up and how free I was to play and question and be this person that no matter what, unconditional, my family luckily I was fortunate to come from a place of unconditional love in my family. And so seeing that voice, which felt a lot like spirit, and yet I didn't start going to church or become a Christian until like my 20s. And so, yeah, this is a place for me that feels, that communion feels like spirituality to me.
And Juliana, I wanted to, mine is a little, I guess, more abstract. I tend to find more association with the books, the people who are not present. Learning what they think. And also, I mean, in discussion too, but just in multiple contexts. Like I also, that one's mine right there. I feel more connected with people spiritually when I'm outside. And I think that's something I got from my dad. That was kind of his version of spirituality, just being outside. We'd be out there for hours and hours. And just being outside with people and being able to read and learn what people think who are either, have passed on or are just not present.
What I think is really interesting too is about this idea is that Sakina, that the place that you feel that spiritual connection isn't necessarily with people who have a similar religious affiliation, but have this, that kindred spirit kind of connection where you feel engaged. And that sometimes maybe the ways that in order for us to find community with like-spirited others, sometimes for some people means leaving behind some of our investments or our perspectives, because in order to fit into some of these places, we have to negotiate what this place asks of us, or this icon asks, or this tradition asks, which may not be what we feel if we were able to express ourselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I drew this, was trying to be a choir. I've been singing in choir since I was a little child, and we wear robes. So I like both the belonging you put on the robe, and that begins to sort of unite, and then you know your part. You each have your part. You all have to be participating, but in a certain way, you're one voice.
Right.
So I mean, that's a very embodied kind of weekly sense of community that I end up doing that without even thinking about it. It's to me, I'm a Christian, so to me that's, if I'm not singing in the choir, I'm not doing worship.
Yeah, and that's something I used to be in the choir a lot, and moved to San Diego from New York and haven't found a choir, and I have felt so disconnected in trying to find a community, and I think that's been a conflict for me. Like my image is with one person right now, because that's how I feel. I find people that you spark this, I get you at a deep level, but I don't find that right now in the churches that I've been trying to go to, and that's been a conflict, and that can stem a whole journey of, well, is this the religion that I'm striving to, or is this the place I happen to be in this whole kind of journey of it, reevaluating where you are.
Anything else, Stefan? So I asked us to imagine what it might be like to be in community with not necessarily the similar spirited others as a transition into this new space, about what it might be like to move from these into our academic homes, our academic selves.
So mine's this weird one that looks like a pumpkin. I can't draw anything. So I thought it was interesting as I was thinking back on kind of how I drew these, right? So this journey over there, kind of this sense of there's a theme of denying yourself, but sort of this journey, right? You're bearing this and you're trying to get rid of these things in yourself, and then over here, kind of doing this with others, right? And then these people in your community sort of bearing that with you, but then in here, right? In sort of the setting, how it feels like is sort of like that gets silenced, and you sort of have to put up. It feels like you have to sort of put up this guard of like, okay, they're not, going to bear these burdens the same as those people that are in community with me, and so it feels like that way, right? And so it becomes a process of trying to how to overcome that, right? It sort of seems weird to do that.
I think it's interesting too how many eyes there are.
Yeah.
Wow, right.
And also but for the most part, the simplicity
Yeah.
that's going on here
Yeah,
compared
right.
to the other two groupings.
Yeah, that's true.
The other thing about the question mark, like that one actually has a question mark, but not what it seems like. This one too. Well, it's mine. That was supposed to be yours.
Soapbox.
That one was mine.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that that was the first instinct I had when you were sort of giving the prompt. And part of that is not just in the way that we think of the cliche of like get on your soapbox, but literally I was picturing somebody standing on a soapbox being like, hey, you know what I mean? I'm always, one of the things that's like a part of my classroom, I have students years later be like, are you still saying that same old thing? Which is I always, when I'm talking about something, sometimes I'll stop and I'll go, this is a soapbox moment. And I'll like literally like step over, kind of to indicate to them like, I'm not exactly talking about the text right now. This is kind of my own opinion, but I always am like reminding them, my opinion is based on research and theories and things like that, but this is the soapbox moment.
Right.
Step over onto it, I'm going to
Yeah.
kind of give my opinion. Because part of that is you have that space, you've been hired, they trust you to teach that class. You're not just someone who came off the street. And that's not to sort of put students in a lower space, but they're experts in their own areas and things like that. It's a community in many ways, but you as a professor, you're standing on that little soapbox shouting at them to hope that they get whatever you're trying to infuse into them, suds it around.
I'm really glad you explained it in that way, because I was thinking that maybe someone was thinking have to be hygienic, clean, cleansed of any associations in my professional space, which would be so much of a sadder way to look at it, but for many it's true, and it's kind of what your picture was almost going for, is that you have to wash that out when we're in a space like that.
Anybody else got anything?
Did this one with the lots of eyes, and I was first trying to, and I realized I just see students' eyes, I guess it's like a little bit the blue of the soul. But increasingly, I have to say at this point in my career, it's different than I was earlier, but I really am aware of the sort of flow of the spiritual dynamic of a classroom. And so there's always this additional dimension below anything we're covering in terms of content that increasingly I'm really aware of, that I'm companioning these beings through this period.
Was there anything when you were drawing this that came up for you when you got the first prompt in your body? Did you feel like a or a hey? Yeah, you felt tense. Yeah.
Well, you were saying words like uncertainty and anxiety and people who are unfamiliar place.
Oh, right, because that was the prompt before coming here.
Yeah,
that's
so-
true. Right. So maybe I seeded that in the experience. And maybe that's my own experience of what it feels like for me to transition from this place to this place is about feeling uncertain. And not everybody feels that way. And so we also want to name critically that when we code switch, style switch, navigate from place to place, we internalize that I have to cover this up, put this away. It's not okay for me to bring that into the classroom, especially if we're of a non-dominant culture, that I can't bring these things into the classroom. We sometimes interrogate that a little bit differently, I think, than other people, maybe, who don't necessarily think that way or feel that way going into a classroom. I don't know. I'm asking. I
feel pretty comfortable. Mine's the one with the hearts here. I've been doing research on prayer for about 15 years. And when I go into the classroom now, I have them meditate. The first, I just put meditate, and then I put a word. And I just close my eyes and sit there as people file in, hoping they get the clue. And some of them still talk, but eventually they settle in. And I say, we're going to do this every day, and da-da-da. I make sure to acknowledge a wide variety of spiritual perspectives. So even a person who has no spirituality, I don't think there is such a person like that, but maybe, you can just reflect on what the word is. You don't have to think anything spiritual or religious or whatever. But if you have a spirituality, you can bring it to that moment. And whether you're from the east or the west, you can bring something to them. And then we talk about what they reflected on afterwards for a couple of minutes, and it almost always surprises me because they never are thinking about what I thought they were going to do. And that adds an exciting dimension to the teaching thing. And it's a nice bridge to the content because it sort of preps them and gets them ready. I think for some of them, it is the only quiet space in their day. And it's only for like 2 or 3 minutes that we just are quiet. But I enjoy that. So they know that I have this spiritual orientation. I don't reveal my particular faith, but I let them know prayer, and I use the words prayer and meditation almost interchangeably because some people are uncomfortable with one or the other. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
I was just going to say, I throughout my life have felt, though I identify as Christian, that puts me in a box, as you were sort of saying. Sort of some point I just said, you're going to look at me, this is how I do Christian, let it trouble your categories. But I do think that's liberating for both for me, because I just sort of made that decision at some point. But I do feel like when you're put in the box, it's almost, even if you're the dominant faith tradition, there are lots of opinions about what that should look like, which may not be yours. So, I mean, even though it's a different kind of marginalization, it still is a difficult negotiation.
Right. And I think one thing that might be interesting, and I don't know if this is true, so I'm gonna just say it that when you say that, Kate, what I think about is that a person who comes from a dominant religion has all of these, like, because we get exposed to what that seems like. What are these faiths? Like, you shouldn't be this, you shouldn't be that, you have to follow this, you have to do that. These are the things. Okay. 5 minutes over?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just say that what happens though and that gets ascribed to you, but for people who are from a non-dominant, there's a lot of questions. Well, what does that mean? What do you do? What does pagan mean? Like those kinds of questions. What's a Muslim? Is that different? So I think that there are ways that all of us navigate what our knowing and not knowing of each other are, and maybe to plant the seed for your future classrooms to think about the ways that your students navigate that every time they come into the classroom, and what ways we can create space for us and them to navigate it safely. Thank you. Thank you. Can I ask everybody a favor? I have to run off to another panel right now. Can you help put the chairs back together? Would that be okay?
If you want to take your pictures with you.
Yeah, I don't feel like you can't take this.